Hi, everybody. This is the podcast, Everything About Hockey. Today's podcast, I'm doing a preview the Western Conference teams for the 2023-24 NHL season. First, I'm going to start off with Central Division, and then I'm going to finish up with the Pacific Division. And the preview of each team will be going in alphabetical order according to their divisions. I also like to look at, stats-wise, I like to look at the goals for and goals against for the team. And for the individual players, I always like looking at points per game. Now let's preview the Central Division of the NHL for this upcoming season. First off, the Arizona Coyotes. Now, I'm not going to talk about the arena situation because that's going to be another podcast. I'm strictly focusing on the players on the ice and the situation on the ice. So let's start talking about let's start about the strengths first. That'd be a good place to start. Let's strengths. I'm going to talk about the first player I think personally is the best player they got in their roster, Clayton Keller. His points per game is 1.05. He's a creative winger they got, can score in any situation. Now let's talk about the other winger on the other side. That would be Nick Schmaltz. He's a pretty creative winger. His points per game last year was 0.92. And the guy centering it, that would be Barrett Hayton. I think he played for Philly, if I remember right. He's a good quality center iceman. He's not a dominating center iceman, but he can get the job done. They also picked up Jason Zucker. I think that's a nice little pickup. He's a little inconsistent, but he's a talented scoring winger. But the guy I think is most interesting is one of their new guys coming up. A guy that played for the University of Minnesota, Logan Cooley. In 39 games, he got 22 goals, 38 assists for 60 points. He was one of the top forwards in Division I NCAA ice hockey last year. He just controlled the play for Minnesota. He's one of the reasons why they won the Big Ten last year in the regular season. Now, he was a little iffy about even going to Arizona this year, but he did sign a 3-year entry-level deal earlier this summer. So he will be playing for Arizona this fall. Arizona only had a 2.74 goals for last year. But I think with this talent they got, that should actually improve a little bit. I think they should be closer to the 3 goals a game. Now I'm going to talk about the defense, but I'm going to leave out Karel Mavelka, their goaltender. Because I think if he was on a better team, he'd have a whole lot better numbers. He is spectacular at goal. He is just all over the place. He makes unbelievable saves. He kind of reminds me of a mixture of Sergei Bobrovsky and Dominik Hasek, all put into like one type of a goaltender. He's like makes unbelievable saves. He's kicking his legs out. He's glove hand, stick, rolling on the ice. It is unbelievable. If he was just on a better team, he would be a better stats. So I'm going to leave him out. But the rest of the team's defense needs improving unbelievably bad. They finished up with a goals against of 3.68, which I'm kind of surprised. I think it's actually a little low. I thought they'd be more than a 4 with this team, because they seem to just let shooters just shoot right on the goaltenders. They don't really seem to get in the way and slow forwards down. Of course, I also have to remember, because of their financial situation, which I told you I wasn't going to bring up, but I have to bring it up, they are getting rid of a lot of players simply because they just don't have the money to pay them. With the arena that they're in and the desperate search for a new arena. So that is taking the effect, especially on the blue end, because they did lose a couple of blue liners through free agency. But they desperately need a number 1 defenseman that can run the power play, control even strength, and really kind of calm things down in the defensive zone, which I don't see them doing because, like I said, the financial situation is what it is. Let's go on to the next one, Chicago Blackhawks. This is a team that had the hockey gods bless them with a big blessing. When they got the jump up 3 spots to get the number 1 overall pick in the draft lottery last year. To be able to get Connor Bedard, a generational forward that could be up there with Crosby and Connor Davis as an elite scoring, all-around center iceman that can just lead a team and get like 150 points easy. So they lucked out. And then the other big piece they got was a couple years ago when they traded with Columbus to get Seth Jones. He is a true number one defenseman in the NHL. He is an all-star defenseman. He can run the power play. He can control even strength. He can penalty kill. He's got the size. He's got the strength in the defensive zone to clear it out. He is a all-star defenseman. So they have those two guys. Then everybody else in this roster, I think, well, they also got Taylor Hall from Boston, which, coming out of London in the OHL when he was drafted by Edmonton, he was a dominating left winger. It was unbelievable. Everybody thought he would be an elite left winger. He's never quite lived up to that, but he is a true, reliable left winger. He's really responsible now. And he does have high-end skill and quickness. So he really should work well with Connor Bedard and his skill set compared to Taylor Hall's skill set. They should match up pretty good. But everybody else in that roster, I really have a question about. They're all average, just a little bit above average NHL talent. I'm going to add Lucas Reichel to the actual high-end guys too. He actually scored 20 goals and 30 assists in the AHL last year, and he showed really promise when he was called up to the NHL. So he also could be a possible top 6 forward down the future. That could be an all-star capability, but overall, this team has some real question marks on quality. And this is where I think what they should do as a weakness is I think they should just go for another top 5 draft pick and let Connor Bedard go back to juniors again, because I'm afraid that this guy's going to get hurt with the talent this team has. Because Connor Bedard likes to drive the play, bust through a couple defensemen, do some dekes, cutbacks, then drive right to the net and do a twisted wrister, top shelf where mama hides the cookies. That's his signature goal-scoring move. And I'm afraid if he does this in the NHL with not much help, they're going to lay him on his butt. He's only 5'10", 185 pounds. So, he can be pushed around real easy. And they do have some guys coming up in the system that they've drafted the last couple of years that can make a real impact too. So there is a lot of hope for this Blackhawks team. I just worry about having a generational player get seriously hurt his first year because he's not protected. He doesn't have anything around him to help him out. For example, most teams that have a generational player, they have another player that's kind of is his assistant, kind of like for instance, Connor McDavid is Batman. I would say Draisaitl is his Robin. Or in Pittsburgh, if Sidney Crosby is Batman, Malkin is his Robin. Let's even go back to the 1980s. If Wayne Gretzky is Batman, you have Messier is the Robin. And let's go back to the Chicago Blackhawks in the 90s. Kane is the Batman, Taves would be the Robin. See what I'm coming at here? Generational players normally have another superstar stud to help them out. So when the opposing team starts focusing on the generational player, they have another player that can kind of pick up the slack. That's why I say send Connor Bedard back to major juniors so Chicago can get at least a top 3 pick, hopefully another number 1 pick, so they can have a Batman and a Robin. So I hope this makes sense to you, what I'm trying to say. If not, then I've totally confused you. Well, let's go to the next team, the Colorado Avalanche. This team always has a great offense. an unbelievable offense, actually, the last couple of years. But this year, something's a little different. Gabriel Landeskog is hurt. He has got a knee injury. He'll be out for the rest of the season. This is the top line left winger. He's the, remember I was just talking about Batman and Robin? He's a Robin to an elite, high-end, game-changing center iceman. Nathan MacKinnon, his points per game last year was 1.56. He's an elite center iceman, and he lost his sidekick, his wingman, Gabriel Landeskog. Like I said, will be out for the rest of the year with a knee injury. And it looks like Terry Lettinen will probably be the person that will be moving up to that first line. So you fantasy team owners, he's got an opportunity to be a big scorer for you. Then the other interesting move to shore up that top six was they acquired Ryan Johansson from the Nashville Predators this summer, which is kind of an interesting pickup because he tends to be invisible for long periods of time. You tend to not really notice him for several games. Then he'll all of a sudden appear and have a really good game. And then a couple games later, you don't notice him for several games again. But he will be the number 2 center iceman, so he's not going to be put into a pressure situation where he has to score or he has to play solid defense. He can kind of fit in, and the matchups will be better for him too, because he won't be playing against the top teams' top defensive pairings like he was in Nashville. So I think their goals for and goals against should stay pretty well the same as it was last year. Last year, their goals for was 3.34, and their goals against was 2.72. I think it'll be in the same ballpark because they really didn't lose anybody on the blue line, and their goaltending is still solid. So, I think that they'll still be a solid team. Okay, now let's look at the Dallas Stars. First person I'm going to look at is they still got one heck of an offense, by the way. That's their big strength on Dallas. Rope Hintz, he's going to be still going to be their number 1 center iceman. His points per game was 1.03, and his wingman is a highly skilled forward, Jason Robinson. His points per game last year was 1.33. And then the other guy on the other side, a virtual veteran forward, Joey Pavelski. His points per game was 1.94. Now this is the interesting part. Jamie Benn has been in the league for 14 years, even though his points per game last year was 0.95, which is pretty good. They decided to go out and get another forward, and he's a versatile winger too, Matt Duchene from the Nashville Predators. His points per game is 0.79. So I can see Dallas's goals for staying close to the same what it was last year, which was 3.43. And their goals against was 2.62, which I think will be about the same ballpark too. Now, their defense hadn't changed much, but their defense isn't overwhelmingly dominating physically. So they can get pushed around a little bit, but it's still high-end defense. And their goaltending, Jake Ottinger, he seems to win a lot. He's all over that place, but he just never really feels comfortable. It looks to me like he never feels comfortable in the net. He's just everywhere, but he doesn't have the control that I'd see other goaltenders have. But he puts on unbelievable numbers. He seems to always average a little over 2 goals a game, and he's always got a 90 save percentage, but he just, I don't know, if I might be just picky about him. I don't know, he just doesn't look comfortable in net when I watch him play. Okay, the next team I'm going to talk about is the Minnesota Wild. They kind of kept everything status quo. They really didn't do anything that spectacular during the offseason. Kaprizov is going to be the main goal scorer for the team again. His goals against his points per game last year was 1.17. So he was over a point a game last year. I don't see that changing again. I think he should be over a point a game this year. Their goal was 4 last year WAR 2.19. The goals allowed was 2.67. So I think that's going to be the same spot as it was last year. They're an idea what I call a muddy middle team. A team that is never going to win a cup because they don't have the real horses to do that. But they're also never bad enough to get a top pick in the NHL draft. Get 1, 2, or 3. And that 1, 2, 3 picks in that NHL draft, the really high ones, to get those generational players or those elite talent that you get with those top couple picks. They make the playoffs on occasion. Every once in a while they miss the playoffs. And they win around, sometimes 2. But they are never a real legitimate threat to win a cup. So, that's my preview of Minnesota. Let's go to the next team. Nashville Predators is the next team. They got one of the best goaltenders in the league, Saros. His goal against average was 2.76. His save percentage is 1.97. Typical. He's a all-star, high-end goaltender. And they still got a solid defense. They got Roman Josi. He's an NHL all-star, one of the elite defensemen in the game right now. And I like also they got acquired Ryan McDonough. He's also a solid, actually Stanley Cup champion defenseman that really can anchor this blue line. Last year's goal allowed, though, was 2.19, which I was kind of surprised with how good their defense is and how good their goaltending is. It was up at actually that high, their goal allow last year. That's Nashville's strength, is their defense. Now, their offense, I think that's going to be their weakness. Last year's offense, goals for, was 2.74, which is not bad. But I don't understand the moves they made this year. Let me explain to you a little bit more. Okay, see, they traded Ryan Johansson and bought out Matt Duchene. The buyout's going to cost Nashville Predators $3 million. The following year, the 2024-25 season, it's going to cost Nashville $9.5 million for this buyout. In the 25-26 season, it's going to cost Nashville $6.5 million of their cap space to buy out these two guys. Now, Johansson, I think he's probably, he can get about 20 goals, maybe 30 to 40 assists. And Duchene, if you put him in the right situation, he can get like 30-30. So he's a 60-point guy. But like I said, I'm not a real big fan, but I don't understand why you would do that. And then during the free agency this year, you would pick up Ryan O'Reilly, which is an old guy. You give him a 4-year deal at $4.5 million. Last year, he only scored 16 goals, 14 assists for 30 points. And remember, he's 32 years old right now. Then you go ahead and sign Gus Nyquist for a 2-year deal at $3.2 million. So the next 2 years, you're going to spend $7.7 million on these two guys. So because of these transactions you've got, next year, you've got $11 million against the cap. And then the following year, you're going to have $17 million the following year against that cap. And I don't think Ryan O'Reilly and Gus Nyquist can actually outscore Duchene and Johansson. So I don't understand why. I know for years Nashville's been trying to get rid of Johansson and Duchene because of the cost. They had $10 million each. But I think Barry Trotz really screwed up here. I think he made a major mistake on something that he really didn't need to have to do. The other thing I'm worried about is how this is going to affect Forsberg. He's a solid winger for this team. He's a solid NHL winger. And doing these moves kind of also, I think, even though O'Reilly at one time was a really good center iceman, his skills have gone down. And I'm wondering if it's going to hurt Forsberg down the road too, not having a high-end center iceman to give him the puck. Okay, that was my complaints about Nashville. Let's go on to the next team. The next team is going to be the St. Louis Blues, a team that I have a hard time trying to figure out exactly what this team is actually about. They've got some really good spots, but they also got spots that I'm not too sure exactly what they're trying to accomplish. Perfect example is Pavel Buchnevich. He's a solid all-around forward. His points per game last year was 1.06. He's one of several Blues players they can build around. Another guy is Jordan Kyrou. He's another high-end scoring winger they have for that team. Also another strength is they have 3 solid center icemen. Not superstar center icemen, but they are solid center icemen. First off is Robert Thomas. They also have Braden Shen. And then they just picked up Kevin Haynes from Philadelphia. So they're 3 deep at center. They also have a young forward that really impressed me a few years ago when he played for Springfield. Last year he played for the Blues. The guy's name is Jake Neighbors. He's 21 years old. I think he's going to have a really good breakout year this year. Just my opinion on that one. It's just a feeling I have. Simply because a couple years ago when I watched him play for Springfield in the AHL, and he played also for Edmonton in the Western Hockey League, and he was pretty impressive at that level too. Last year's goals for was 3.17. Unfortunately, last year's goals against was 3.63. So I think the goals for should stay about that same range this year, but they got to get that goals against down below 3. I mean, 3.63 is not going to give you a very competitive team. They've got some defensemen that aren't bad. They're solid defensemen. Obviously, Colton Parayko and Justin Falk have to play at their very best to get the goals against down. But they're not the only one at fault. The real weakness of this team, I think, is goaltending. They've got a starting goaltender that's been totally inconsistent the last couple of years. And that's Jordan Binnington. His goals against was 3.31, and his save percentage was .894. For a starting goaltender, especially a Stanley Cup champion starting goaltender, those numbers are unacceptable. He has to play better. And their backup goaltender, Joseph Hofer, he's a 23 years old, and he's played pretty good in the AHL for Springfield, but he's inexperienced at the NHL level at that age. And I'm not too sure what's going to happen next year, especially with the inconsistent play of their starting goaltender. Is he going to stay a backup goaltender, or is he going to take over the crease and become their starter? It's still in the air for me. And they have to have solid goaltending. They need to get that goals allowed down if they're going to be somewhat competitive in the Western Conference. Now let's look at the one more team in the Central Division in the Western Conference, and that would be the Winnipeg Jets. This team here, at one time a few years back, most experts thought they were going to be a cup contending team, including me. Not that I'm an expert, by the way, but it just never did happen for them. And now I think they're starting to go on the decline again. So let's look at their strength and weakness. Of course, their most obvious strength is a goaltending. When you have Connor Hellebuck in the crease, you have an elite goaltender backstopping your team. I mean, how great has Hellebuck been these last few years to keep the Jets competitive? Let's look at the numbers. His goals against average last year was 2.63. His save percentage is 9.8. That's solid numbers for goaltender. And, of course, their team goals allowed was 2.72, which is not bad. And they do have a true number one center iceman in Mark Scheifele. He's a all-around quality number one center ice. His points per game last year was .84, not bad. And his winger is Kyle Connor. He's a quality, high-end scoring winger. And they also got some quality depth through a trade this summer when they traded PLD, Pierre-Luc Dubois, to LA, and they got Alex Iapallo and Gabe Bellardi, which really adds quality depth to that second line. I think it'll really fit into a guy they acquired last year in a trade from Nashville, Nino Niederreiter. He's a quality veteran scoring winger. Last year's Winnipeg's scoring goals for was 2.94, and their goals allowed was 2.72. And having Josh Morrissey anchor that blue line, he's a quality number one pairing, actually a number one defenseman in the NHL. Makes his team just as good on the back end. And there was no real additions. There actually was no additions on the back end this summer. So this defense is going to be the same as it was last year. With solid defense and a solid goaltender, I think the goals allowed should be stayed in the same spot that it was this year. My only complaint for this team, or my own weakness is this team, it didn't have a true sniper, a guy that can get that clutch goal anymore. It once did when it had Patrick Laine. But once he left, this team has been looking for a high-end, elite scorer that can score that clutch goal. And they have nobody in the near future that's going to be able to step into that role. They got a couple guys in the long term that could possibly do it, but nobody immediately can do this when it comes to their prospect pool. There was one guy on the roster that I thought was going to develop into one of these type of players, but he hadn't quite done it yet. But he just hadn't quite developed. He's only 21, so he could have a chance to develop, which I'm talking about Cole Perfetti. He's a versatile scoring winger, but he doesn't seem to have that high-end scoring capability that I thought he had when they drafted him. Well, that's my rundown of the Central Division in the Western Conference. Now, we're going to go with part 2 of this NHL preview. Now we're going to look at the Pacific Division. First off, we're starting out with the Anaheim Ducks. We're doing this in alphabetical order for each division. Now let's look at the Pacific Division, the strengths and weaknesses of those teams. So let's start out with the Anaheim Ducks. The true strength of this team is the top 6 center icemen, Trevor Zegras and Mason McTavish. They have 2 quality young center icemen to build this team around. I also like what they've done in the free agency market. Last year from the Rangers, they got Ryan Strome. And this year from the Tampa Bay Lightning, they pick up Alex Killorn. He's a quality 200 by 80 foot forward that's real responsible and a true leader, and I think can really help this very young Ducks team. And they've also got 2 solid defensemen they can build around, Cam Foley, and also a very young but talented James Drysdale. And to help the back end, they picked up this year Robert Hagg and a big, hard-hitting defenseman, a defensive defenseman, comes from Florida, Racco Gudis. And he's exactly what Anaheim needs. You know, I'm always preaching that physical presence, that hard-hitting. Quote from Don Cherry, rock'em sock'em, physical presence that they need. Every team needs. This guy will give that to them. Remember, Anaheim's goals allowed was 4.09. They need some good quality defensemen. Get that thing down. Of course, their biggest pressing need is offense. Their goals scored last year was only 2.51. This is where I think the problem is, the lack of scoring, especially at the wing. This is where their biggest problem is. They don't have a real true sniper to help those big center icemen out. And this in the draft, everybody was questioning the pick of Leo Carlsson over Adam Fantilli. This is what I think Pat Verbeek was thinking here. Leo Carlsson is a center, but he can play left wing, and he can drive the play from the left side. He's got great passing capabilities, and he's big. The guy is 6'3", 200 pounds, so he can use him as a center, but if they play him at the wing, he can drive the play that size from the wing. And that way, then, if you get a sniper on the other side, you got some really quality first line there. So it's just a hunch, but I think when he turns pro, he'll be playing left wing for Anaheim. The other weakness I think is going to be in goal. John Gibson, he's a workhorse goaltender, but he's getting old, and his numbers are starting to decline. For instance, his goals against average last year was 3.99, and his save percentage was .899. This is when I think in Lucas Dossel, he played for San Diego Gulls at the AHL, and he did a solid job in the AHL. I think they're gradually going to move him in that starting spot, which is he's a young, inexperienced NHL goaltender. In the short term, I think this could be a real weakness for him, but in the future, it could really help the guy out with his development. So that's my preview of the Anaheim Ducks. Let's go to the next team. Let's do a preview of the Calgary Flames now. This is a team that I find kind of fascinating too. They tend to be not overwhelming in any certain category, but they always seem to be a competitive team last year. And I think it's going to stay same type of situation again this year with the preview. As far as the Flames offense goes, Elias Lindholm is the driving force. He's the center iceman. He's the one that sets up the offense for the team. Then their scoring winger is Jonathan Huberdeau. He's a big, creative, high-end scoring forward for this team. Then add a little bit more offensive depth. They got Yegor Sharangovich from the Devils. He's a versatile two-way winger. Go with Nazem Kadri, a big pickup they got last year from the Colorado Avalanche. They've got a solid defense. That's also a strength. They don't have any real dominating defensemen, but their top six is very versatile and reliable. Their goals allowed last year was 3.01, and their goals for last year was 3.15. So yeah, I'm kind of surprised that they still gave up 3 goals, which is solid, but one of the weaknesses, they still need a big stud defenseman, and they also need more depth at forward. I think they could use a couple more grinders on the bottom 6 and another elite scoring forward for the top 6. As for goaltending, Jacob Markstrom, he did all right. He was solid, not spectacular at all. But I do think I like the goaltender they have on their third string, Dustin Wolf. He played in AAA for the Calgary Wranglers, and he had a pretty good season there. I think he could probably step up and at least be the backup this year. I think that would be a really big improvement at goal for the Calgary Flames. Okay, the next team I'm going to do is the Edmonton Oilers. Obvious strength is their offense. When you have Connor McDavid and Draisaitl on your same team, I mean, how can you not have a tremendous strength there? Connor McDavid's points per game last year was 1.87, and Draisaitl's points per game was 1.60. So, I mean, come on. And then you add Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, and then also you got Evander Kane, 2 other highly skilled offensive forwards in your top 6. Then they go out and get Connor Brown from the Ottawa Senators. He's a solid two-way winger. He can play a 80 by 200-foot game. He's good at retrieving pucks, so he's really going to help Connor McDavid and Draisaitl out because he can do the rough stuff in the corners and behind the net and retrieve pucks for their 2 superstar stud forwards they got on that team. So their top 6 is loaded. Their bottom 6, not so much. I still think they need, I keep going back on a lot of teams, they need some more grinders. Edmonton's goals for last year was 3.96, and their goals allowed was 3.12. Their defense is okay, not spectacular either. They've got some solid defensive players, but nothing that would scare any other teams. And then you would think they'd have a really stud goaltender to make up the difference, but they don't. They got Stuart Skinner and Jack Campbell as their goaltenders. Both of them are very up and down. You never know what you're going to get with either one of these guys. This is going to be the downfall of the Edmonton Oilers again. They're going to go really good in the regular season, and then hit the playoffs. They're going to have some goaltending and some defensive problems, and they're going to get knocked out again. It'll be another year with Connor McDavid not being able to get his name on Lord Stanley. Okay, let's look at the LA Kings. Let's look at their strengths and weaknesses. The strength, obviously, is their 2 players they've had on this team for multiple years. Won Stanley Cups with these 2 guys. course, I'm talking about Andrei Kopitar, their starting center iceman, and their number one defenseman, Drew Doughty. Multiple Stanley Cups with these guys. True anchors for this Kings team. Now, the forward they're going to be really focusing on to really give them some offense is Kevin Fiala. His stats were for last year. He had 23 goals, 49 assists for 72 points. And he's going to be the main scoring person for this team, especially since they traded a lot of their offensive depth to get PLD, Pierre-Luc Dubois, from the Winnipeg Jets. He's a big, powerful center iceman. He'll probably be centering at their second line, but I'm sure the GM, Rob Blake, will hoping that he gradually develop into a first-line center iceman for this team and take over the first-line center ice from Kopitar. But I do have my doubts because he tends to get bored easy. Remember, this is his third team. He got bored with Columbus and decided to leave them. Then he got bored with Winnipeg and he decided to leave Winnipeg. I wonder how long it's going to take him to get bored with L.A. and decide to leave L.A. You also got to remember they traded 2/3 of their second line to get PLD, Pierre-Luc Dubois. And that means then a young guy that's been having a hard time developing into the NHL player that everybody thought he was going to be, becoming the second overall pick in 2020, Quentin Byfield. They drafted him as a center, but he didn't quite work out so far with that. So now they're trying to move him over to wing to see if they can get him going. But he has yet to really develop into a true top six forward for him. So now let's look at some numbers for him. LA goals for was 3.24. Goals allowed was 3.14. So they're not bad numbers, but they're not spectacular either. This is where I don't understand what Rob Blake was doing. They had Jonathan Quick for a long period of time, stud goaltender, managed to win several cups with him. He walked because of his age, and they never quite figured out how to replace him. So now they're going with this year they got journeyman goaltender Phoenix Copley, and then they also acquired this year a veteran, quality veteran goaltender, Cam Talbot. I mean, he's a solid goaltender, but he's not a true number one goaltender. Neither one of these guys are true number one goaltenders. Obviously, that's one of my weaknesses for the LA Kings is goaltending. Another weakness that kind of combined into their strength is the top six forwards. I don't really think they have a whole lot of pure scoring capability out of these top six forwards on the Kings team. They don't have a true sniper. So I think that's really going to be a big factor in this team. That when they really need to get a clutch goal, I don't see them being able to do that. So let's go on to the next team. I've already told you my strength and weakness is the Kings. Let's go to the next one. That would be the new Seattle Kraken. Now, Rob Francis did a really good job of putting this team together. They got tremendous depth, forward, defense, goaltending, salary cap situation. They're solid there. They got plenty of wiggle room to actually acquire more players if they desire to. That's tremendously helpful with a team like this. Now, I'm not going to go really in detail into the players because all the players kind of mesh together. I guess that's what makes them a playoff team. They play great team defense and team offense. The goaltenders do exactly enough to keep them in games. But there's a weakness to this, too. They don't really have a clutch offensive scorer. A guy in the top six, they can guarantee he'll get goals when he needs to get goals. And they also don't have a true number one defenseman that can play offense, defense, and lead a team from the back end. That's a true weakness for this team. But they do have a true number one center iceman they drafted last year from the University of Michigan, Matty Beniers, which is it's impossible for a lot of teams to get a true number one center iceman. They go years trying to get himself a true number one center iceman. Remember, he also won the Calder Cup this year as best rookie. So, he's proven he can play. And so they got that going for him. They got their future number one center iceman, which is a real big plus. And they still got some time to build around. They're doing a good job of developing the prospects, which is a strength. And you also got to remember that the AAA team, the Coachella Valley Firebirds, actually went pretty deep into the playoffs. So, they're starting to build from the bottom up. Is exactly what you need to make a championship team. I sound like a politician. Build from the bottom up. But that's how you do it in the NHL. Of course, this next year you can count on Jarrett McCann and Jordan Everly being their high-end scoring wingers. And back in the blue line, Vince Dunn had a monstrous season last year. So that's going to be interesting. I think he's going to anchor that blue line again this year. The other player that I think is going to be interesting to watch is Shane Wright. He was the 4th overall pick in the 2022 draft. And he just couldn't quite figure out the NHL last year. So they sent him back down to juniors in the OHL, Windsor Spitfire. He did pretty good. He had 15 goals for 23 assists for 37 points. So he had a good year in the OHL. So now it's going to be really interesting to see what he does when he gets his opportunity to go back to the NHL with a training camp and see if he can actually develop into a top 6 forward like what they originally drafted him for. That's my opinion on what the strength and weaknesses for the Seattle Kraken are. So let's look at the next team. Okay, let's look at the San Jose Sharks. Now, offense is going to be the strength because really that's the only thing they really have right now after trading Erik Karlsson away on the defensive side. So let's look at some offensive players they have that's going to help produce some goals for this team. The main offensive threat is going to be Logan Couture. He played 82 games. He got 27 goals for 40 assists for 67 points. His points per game is .82. So obviously he's the main threat for this team. They're starting to go through a rebuild. But the new GM of this team, Mike Greer, has helped a little bit by acquiring 2 more players. They picked up Granlund. He's a talented playmaking winger. He played for Pittsburgh last year, and he also played for Nashville. They also picked up a winger, Mike Hoffman. He's a sniper, but he still has some development to do or to get his game rounded out to be a true NHLer. But those 2 guys can help out on this depleted forward unit from trades they had last year. And I also forgot about mentioning Tomas Hertl. I almost forgot about that guy. He's a first-line center iceman. So now let's look at the stats. Goals for last year for the Sharks was 2.84. Goals allowed was 3.84. I mean, they have to improve that, which I don't think they're going to be able to, because the weakness on this team is obviously goaltending and defense, especially with Erik Karlsson gone. This defense isn't any spectacular defense at all. They're good. They're more or less an average defense, an average NHL defense. Then you also got to consider the goaltending. Mackenzie Blackwood is the starter. He's better off as a backup goaltender, but he's not a starter. He's a little inconsistent, and he does get hurt easy. He's a depth goaltender. So, I don't think the goals allowed is going to improve at all this year because of this. That's the true weakness. But the big bright spot this summer was they got Will Smith, 4th overall in the NHL draft. He has the potential of being a real stud forward for this team in the future. Now let's go to the next team, which is the Vancouver Canucks. This is a team that I always have high hopes for, but this team always manages to disappoint me every time. And they got some real talent on this team. They got Elias Pettersson. He got 100 points last year. He's a true number 1 center iceman. And look on his wing. There's Brock Besser. His points per game last year was .74. So he almost was a point-a-game guy himself. Then they have Andrei Kuzmenko. He's a talented sniper they have this team. He had like 70 points last year. So they got some skill on this team. And then you also consider their second line center iceman is TJ Miller. He's a versatile, do-it-all forward that's taking that second spot in the center ice. Then you consider on the back end, you got Quentin Hughes, the number one defenseman. I mean, he can play all three zones. He can handle the power play. He can play in the offensive zone. He can play in the defensive zone. He's an NHL all-star defenseman. Then you look at Demko. He should be a high-end starting number one goaltender. And let's look at the numbers here. Let's look at the stats. The goals for last year were 3.29, and the goals allowed were 3.61. So, I mean, they should be able to keep the goals for the same spot. The goals allowed has to improve. This defense should be better. And they did add a couple guys that should help. They got Carlson Soucy and Ian Cole. Both are veteran defensemen, but both are defensive defensemen that can help clear out the net and make life for the other team's forward difficult in their defensive zone. They also added a little bit more depth in the bottom six, getting Teddy Bluger. He's a good defensive forward. He's not going to give you a whole lot of offense, but he's going to be great for that defensive bottom six checking line, which would really help the goals against drop down. So I do like what Vancouver's hockey operations did to improve their team this last summer. Now let's go to the next team, the Stanley Cup champion, Vegas Golden Knights. This is a very high-tempo team that's got some scoring punch to them, but they play another one of those great team games. You know, all the players play their positions and make very few mistakes. I personally think Bruce Cassidy is just as valuable as any of these players on this team. I think he's more valuable to winning that Stanley Cup. He has this team playing an unbelievable team game. Of course, we're going to start with the Conn Smythe winner, original Golden Knight, original player on the Misfits. Of course, I'm talking about Jonathan Marchessault. He's a highly skilled forward, team leader, can do anything. He's an all-star, a highly skilled forward. And then you have Jack Eichel, the big number one center iceman they got from Buffalo. Jack Eichel, he was hurt when he came into Vegas. He got better, and now he's a legitimate number one Stanley Cup champion center iceman. Then they got the number two center iceman, Chandler Stevenson. He's a versatile, all-around center iceman. He's a solid number two guy behind Eichel. Then you had William Karlsson, the third line center iceman. For the bottom six, he's a defensive forward. He can do all the little things. Heck, when he first became a Golden Knight, he's also one of the original No Golden Knights. When he became a Golden Knight, he was one of the leading scorers for that first line. And now he's moved back to third line, and he's still a very critical part of this Golden Knight team. So they're solid up the middle. They got three really solid center icemen. Then you add on Mark Stone, an all-star winger that can put the puck in the net pretty easy. I mean, they got some serious depth on the top six, and the fours in the bottom six are always solid. They know exactly what their role is, and they do it really well. Then you look at the back end, you have Shane Theodore, a solid number one defenseman right there. And then you also got another guy that's another solid number one defenseman. Of course, I'm talking about Alex Trangelo. This is his second Stanley Cup. He won one in St. Louis, and now he's got one in Vegas. So he's a two-time Stanley Cup champion, number one defenseman they got on their team. So let's look at the stats for this team. Vegas' goals for last year was 3.26. Goals allowed was 2.74. So they're solid there on both ends. Now I'm going to get to the weakness. And I really think this is a true weakness. I don't trust it. It's goaltending. Logan Thompson and Hill. I'm not too sure which one will be the starter, but neither one have been proven to be a true number one for a long period of time. They both just kind of burst into the scene, and they still got a lot to prove. They do have one heck of a team in front of them, so that's going to make life a little bit easier for them. But I think that's their true weakness is goaltending. They don't have a stud number one goaltender. The other big weakness they could have, if they do have a lot of massive injuries, this is a team that doesn't worry about developing talent. Remember I said Seattle likes to build from the bottom up? Well, they like to build in Vegas from the top down. They like the trickle-down version of building a team, which could come back to haunt them. Because Kelly McCrimmon loves to trade. I mean, he does these trades constantly. He just gives away draft picks and prospects like they're nothing. And if they do get a bunch of injuries, this is going to come back and haunt them. I think that's a true weakness on this team. Well, that was my Pacific Division preview. I hope you enjoyed it.